Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Jessie Marr, and I'm the director of the Technology Policy Program here at Epic, and really grateful for everyone joining us today and talking about our work at the national level to better understand your drinking water. And as today, y'all know, when you register, we're going to be talking through the beta release of a new tool. Um, as might have been obvious when you joined the meeting, this is going to be recorded. We will share the slides, we'll share the recording after this. And we have a pretty packed agenda, but ample time for discussion. So I just wanted to say, take the time to use the chat to ask any questions along the way, but then we'll also we'll gather those, try to answer them if we can throughout the presentation, but then also make sure that we actually have time to talk. Um, so as I mentioned, I'll walk through like what are we doing? What is the drinking water ecosystem? What is the problem we're looking to solve? How did we get to today? And then we'll be joined from folks across the US to talk through their perspectives and how this complements some of their work. And we'll make sure to close out with actually being able to get the tool in the hands of folks. And so we wanted to just take a minute. We have a lot of folks in here today and wanted to better understand where are you coming from and how well you know your drinking water. So we have, oh no, launched the wrong one. Let me launch the other poll 1 second, figuring this out. Okay, cool. So now what you should be seeing on your screen is we're just curious, two questions, what type of organization are you with? Know that we have a ton coming from feds and nonprofits and utilities. But then also just basic question, right? Like what brings us here today is trying to better understand where we get our drinking water from and curious how many of y'all actually know who is your drinking water provider, or if you're on well water, or if you're like, I'm a renter and I just don't know. Um, and see if those coming in. So it looks like we have um, kind of a 50, maybe not 50-50, but a third feds, third state government, and third nonprofits, with a couple of folks from the private sector as well. Really appreciate y'all. And unsurprisingly, because we're a bunch of drinking water nerds, you all know where you get your water from. Feel free to also introduce yourselves in the chat if there's more that you want to share in terms of where you're calling in from, but just really appreciate taking a chance to know who else is with us today. And so with that, just to introduce Epic a little bit further, for folks that don't know, we are the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. We're both a nonprofit, but we like to think of ourselves as think do tanks, where we're really working in partnership with local, state, and federal agencies to speed up environmental progress. What that means in practice is that we work across many, many different sectors, whether that's restoration or biodiversity or drinking water or climate and environmental justice data. We're singularly focused on what do we need to do to make it not 100 years to replace lead pipes or faster to build a housing development than it is to build a restoration project. And one of our strengths, and a lot of the folks that I know on this call have seen in practice, is that we do not work alone. We work in collaboration with local, state, feds, academics, other nonprofits, other technical assistance providers to get this work done. And the team that you're going to get to know today is our Drinking Water Explorer team. It's a mix of folks that have robust experience in data science and application development, but also in working with water utilities, or working within water utilities, or being state regulators, or doing the technical assistance work to help water utilities apply for and receive federal funding to address any kind of water system performance challenges. And we do that primarily through our work as a EPA Environmental Finance Center. But also our work has benefited from many, many collaborations with academic partners that I just want to name as well, from Duke University and UCLA and Stanford and the University of Arizona. But this is our core team and really grateful for their work. And lastly, just to orient on why we are here today, we're here because it is way too hard to know where we should be prioritizing interventions to improve water system performance and make sense of drinking water data. As we're going to talk through, there are hundreds of data sets that go into understanding if your water is safe to drink or not, or if it's meeting performance criteria. And so we're trying to make sense of that landscape. And our goals at Epic are not, we do not produce the data, but we want to demonstrate what is possible in terms of how folks could have more accessible and actionable information about drinking water systems. We want to also lower the barrier to entry to access this data. So, what you'll see today is that we're not just releasing a tool, but we have the backend GitHub repository. So you can just dig into this yourself or come in. Maybe you don't want to be the data scientist or in the tool itself, but are looking to see like what is the report, what is the distillation, what are the insights from this drinking water data. So just developing a new entry point for folks in understanding um, water systems. And then lastly, just building relationships. So we like to think about what is the network of folks that create the data, that use the data, or are impacted by decisions made from the data. And so building that large community of practice and relationships across sectors. Um, and so just really, again, appreciate everyone being here today. And with that, I will pass the mic to Gabe to walk us through the presentation.
Sweet. Thanks, Jesse. Gabe Watson here, Manager of Data Science and Applications at Epic. And just to dive in, as Jesse said, right, there's a whole ecosystem, if you will, on drinking water data. So if you want to next slide. So this is like a really simple graphic, even though it's aimed to be a simplified version, right? There's still a lot of complexity to it in terms of what we view as the drinking water data ecosystem. Starting first, you have water source. We can get data on underground storage tanks, NIPDs, effluent violations, facilities with risk management plans, 303D impaired waters, drought, aquifer depletion, right? These are all different factors which are a component of the water source. As you move to the right, it goes through intake infrastructure and actually gets to the water supplier where treatment is occurring. Here's where you see a lot of the data from state or federal safe drinking water dashboards, information systems. So water system characteristics like the amount of service connections, a compliance history. Here's also where we can add in data on if the system has received funding through the state revolving fund program or other sources. And then you move to the right, and the data and the water actually makes it to the end consumer. So here we have data on the population served. We can add in a variety of different data sets that are largely at the census geography, but really this section is who's actually served by a system, who's affected if there's a violation or a boil water notice or advisory. And if you can see that little star that's right on the EPA service area, so our whole sort of harmonization effort of the drinking water data ecosystem is at the water service area, and this work couldn't be done without the great work from folks at EPA to develop a national data set on drinking water service areas. If you want a next slide here. So there's a lot of different sources out there, and then there's some collections of different types of data, right, that cross different ecosystems that go from water source to water supplier to population served, right? So there's EPA's How's My Waterway that's largely focused on the water source, and it's got some water supplier information. There's EPA's Infrastructure Capacity and Assessment Tool, or ICAT, right? There's a lot of data on water supplier, some on population served. There's EWG's Tap Water Database, which is some water supplier, some population served data, right? But our goal here is to bring it all together sort of under one umbrella, right? So the goal is to harmonize data across sources and scales, local, state, and national data sets. If you'll notice, there's an asterisk there. Not all data can be perfectly harmonized, looked at the same place, right? It's collected under different methodologies for different purposes by different agencies with different end uses, right? And so there's a whole lot of nuance and caveats that we have to be aware of right, as we're developing sort of a harmonized perspective. And that's really a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past year is to understand, well, what pieces can fit together, what pieces need to be augmented, and what are the appropriate caveats and context that folks need to be able to use the data with confidence and be sure that you're not, saying something that might not necessarily be true. If you want a next slide here.
Quick poll.
Oh, yes, quick poll. Sorry, so here we're actually really curious, right, on what sources folks are using. So we've got like a quick summary. This isn't an extensive list. So if there are other sources of drinking water data or related data on drinking water that you're using, feel free to toss them in the chat if you're not seeing an option here. I'll give folks a second to fill out the poll or jump in the chat. Jesse, I think over to you for poll results.
Oh, okay. I was curious if folks could see. It looks like the majority of folks, I feel like the weather report, like, and looking at the, but it looks like the majority of folks use EPA Safe Drinking Water Information System regularly, which makes a ton of sense. ICAT is relatively unknown to folks, similar to Simple Labs top score. And then the state safe drinking water system seemed to be the other highest contender in terms of folks using that regularly, which again makes sense, right? We want our government data to be authoritative in terms of understanding the actual quality of drinking water. But then some of these other tools that are distilling that information across ICAT, How's My Waterway, and Tap Water Database and Top Score, um, less well known and less well used. But um, thanks, y'all. But again, use the chat. We're curious if there's other resources that you might use or rely upon that aren't some of these big ones.
Appreciate that. If you want to, next slide here. Cool. So we started this work in Texas last year at the request of some technical assistance providers and philanthropy working in East Texas specifically. We were asked to deliver a tool, right, that could serve the need of helping folks understand where is need, where can we prioritize investment, are there patterns of issues at a county or regional level? If you want a next slide here. And the end result was an application, an interactive R-Shiny application, right, that harmonized the data that we were able to work through and be able to provide folks, right, with literally put the data on a map, have folks be harmonized at the water system level, and for folks to be able to filter and sort across the different data sets to identify really the systems that they valued, that they were looking for. So whether it was, I want to find systems, with, that are small, that might have low median household income and persistent violations, or you wanted to find large urban systems, which happen to have a violation of the lead and copper rule, for example, right? This tool was really, an opportunity to prove out the concept that such an application would be useful and that it was possible. And so if you want a next slide. Right, so we investigated 134 variables across 21 data sets and 11 different sources to assemble what we thought was a pretty comprehensive view of Texas water data. So we got data from Texas Council on Environmental Quality, from the Water Development Board, as well as a bunch of other sources. And we worked with our project partners to understand, what are the data fields that you need to be able to better understand the landscape. What are the things that you want to filter on? How do you want the user experience to go? So if you want a next slide here. You skipped one. Yeah. So The feedback has been great. I'll spare y'all from kind of reading these little blurbs. I do like the quote, the Texas tool is dreamy. So really appreciated that. But, this speaks to not only, the work that we've been doing alongside our project partners, but also our activities in terms of doing discovery sessions, testing sessions, really getting that feedback in more than just I use it and it's cool, right? But actually understanding how does it show up in people's work, how are folks able to make decisions differently, and how is it actually providing information and moving the conversation forward. So a little bit more detail in terms of the impact of this work. If you want, next slide, just some highlights from the work that we did in Texas last year. Utilized to provide data-driven policy recommendations on how infrastructure funding is proposed, analyze which communities haven't received SRF funding and have significant durability concerns, as well as helping TA providers prioritize communities and recommend potential policy changes. We also supported statistical research by giving folks access to the underlying data that was conducted by TA providers as well as academics. We showed the increased need for state appropriations for water infrastructure, and the work was also cited in panel discussions and news articles. So we have seen a lot of uptake of the tool itself, but also the data and insights behind it. And so doing this work, we were, in the weeds on the data, and we're like, hey, a lot of the stuff that we're using is, nationally consistent, is available for every other state. And we found ourselves filtering down to Texas when pulling data from Sidwis. And we thought, maybe we could do this at an expanded scale. So we asked ourselves, you want to, next slide, what if we expanded this tool across the US? And I'll hand it over to Emily, who's going to talk a bit about our work over the past year.
Sweet. Thanks, Gabe. Hi, folks. I'm Emily. I'm a data scientist at Epic. And while we set off on a quest to build this national tool, we also use this as an opportunity to improve our process. And Cameron has really been leading a lot of this work, who was our designer that we talked about earlier in the slide deck. But she's had multiple rounds of conversations with over 40 people from other organizations that work on drinking water to academic researchers to community members that were just interested in drinking water to understand issues that they care about and key data sets they'd like to see together within a tool like this. To hit the highlights of some of the main findings from that usability report, to probably no surprise to a lot of us that are really familiar with Sidwis, right? Drinking water is complicated and very hyperlocal, which really underlined the need for us to be able to incorporate state-specific data sets into a tool like this to help capture that nuance and make sure the tool is useful for decisions that occur across a variety of different scales. We also really wanted to make sure that we were clearly communicating within our tool. And so within the drinking water space, there's so many acronyms and jargon that we use. I really wanted to make sure that these data sets were more accessible to people and the data within them were more accessible to folks to really meet people where they are in their drinking water research journey. Next slide, please. Oh, thanks. Yeah, so while these conversations were happening, Gabe and I got back into what I lovingly call our data trench and got back to work trying to find data sets that were available at the national level. On the left, you're seeing data sets that we collected for the Texas tool that were available across the US. And now on the right, you're seeing how we've been able to expand. To hit some of the highlights of some of the new interesting things that we were able to include, we have watershed hazards that could affect source water quality. We also have the percent change in about 80 different census variables over the past decade. So you can identify, what water systems are serving communities that have grown quite a bit over the past 10 years, or maybe ones that have shrunk a lot over the past 10 years, maybe potentially where income has changed. And I also want to bring our attention to this data set down here at the bottom, which is our boil water notices and advisories data set, which I think is one of the most interesting ones and also took us the longest to incorporate. This information combines boil water notices and do not drink or do not use orders from state websites. And the reason why we decided to focus on this data set in particular is because this is the data point that is probably most familiar to customers, right? It's one of the key ways that people find out about either planned maintenance or acute issues with their drinking water, either through like a text message or like a news report. And we really wanted to bring these lived customer experiences into our tool and alongside other federally available and state and nationally available data sets. To my knowledge, I don't think this information has been collated across states, so we might have the largest inventory of drinking water advisories across the US. But the good news in this table that you're seeing is that there are already 13 states that are publicly reporting this information on their websites. In this table, you're seeing not three, 13 states, as well as the coverage across different fields that I cared about. So things like water system ID, which would allow us to connect that data point to other data sets within the data ecosystem. Information like the date the advisory was issued, the date that it was lifted, as well as the advisory type. So was it a do not drink order or was it a boil water notice? We also have been contacting states for permission to use this data set in our tool. So apologies if you've received potentially multiple emails from me. But it's been really awesome to connect with states and learn a little bit more about their data set, how they collected it, the information that they make public, as well as some of the nitty-gritty like data caveats as well to help us understand where are comparisons across different states potentially not appropriate. And so that information will be identified in a note within our tool, and we also will provide that within our supporting documentation as well, just so people can understand a little better and understand that information that's not necessarily captured within the data itself. Next slide. Sorry for the jump scare. This is our data pipeline. This is for the data nerds that are here on the call, which seems to be a lot of us, but you don't have to understand much about our backend data pipeline. But at a glance, you have these orange tiles, which are essentially virtual computers that will turn on once a day, a month, a quarter, or a year, and collect different data sets, and then upload those data sets to different places in our cloud. And then you have code in R, which are those blue tiles over there on the right, which will organize those data sets, standardize them, and also run some quality checks as well before they make it to our staged environment that is organized by the Center of Neighborhood Technologies. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of a deeper dive into the quality checks that I just talked about, but as Gabe mentioned earlier, one of the most important things that we care about in a tool like this is data quality. And so for each data set that we considered, we did a lot of mapping and viewing the data and also ran some quality checks as well that created this mean data score that you're seeing in this table. This table is just a sample. We have a lot more data sets included within our tool, but this is just a little snippet of what it looks like, just to give you all an idea about what we're working with. This data score includes things like how complete is the data set? So how many NAs or blank cells are there that should not be necessarily NAs or blanks? If applicable, like how many duplicates are there? How often do boundaries overlap if it's a geospatial data set? As well as how often or how well does this data set capture the larger data universe? This last one was a little bit more of like an expert gut score to capture things like underreporting. So things that we can't really see in a data set, but are problems that we know about and should factor into a score like this. But zooming out a little bit, the bottom line for this slide is that everything we build and all of our code and our methods will be fully public and free and transparent and accessible. We will also have a very detailed like methodology document that will have these scores and describe what checks were turned on or off for specific data sets. And this is all information that we really want people to have eyes on, right? The more eyes on our work, the better. And we want folks to submit bug reports, feedback forms, or if you're a little bit more tech savvy, pull requests or GitHub issues to help log anything that you would like to see in this tool. We really want folks to engage and help improve not only our tool, but also the underlying data that feeds into the tool as well. So there's a lot of opportunities here to build a community of people who use drinking water data and also work to improve the data ecosystem together. And with that, I'll pass it over to Gabe.
Sweet, folks. Well, here to show sort of some snippets of what we've been cooking up over the past 6 months or so. So unfortunately, won't be doing sort of like a live demo beta. Those are always a perfect setup for things to go less than planned. But I'll be showing some screenshots of what the tool looked like, and then we'll have an opportunity for folks to sign up for testing sessions in December so that you can get access to the tool, sit with our designer Cameron, give feedback, right, to be incorporated into our development. If you want a next slide here. So this is still sort of under construction, but full stop, right? The tool opens up to a national picture utilizing the service area boundaries from EPA. Those are those purple polygons that you're seeing. If you want a next slide. Right, and then understanding that a lot of nuance, right, happens at smaller geographies. We really orientated the user experience around clicking or going into a specific state or county or city, right? So you'll be able to click a state, or in the top left search box, search for an address, or a state, right? Zoom in, and then your data universe, right? The available data constricts to what's available in the state. In the top bar on the right there, you can see different attributes that you're able to filter and click on. If you want a next slide here. Right, and a lot of the tool is oriented around this harmonized data set, being able to filter and sort data based on the service area. So this is just sort of a snippet of what that functionality looks like, where you'll be able to look at CIDWIS compliance data alongside population data, as well as environmental, financial data, et cetera, right? So really looking at the service area as that core unit of analysis, and then having folks be able to, sort of tailor what service areas they're looking at based on what they care about and what filters are available. If you want a next slide here. So really in sum, right, what we're hoping to do with the harmonized drinking water data ecosystem, better position people to dive into the complex factors that influence the quality and long-term durability of drinking water. We've also, in terms of audience, want to enable water systems, policymakers, community members, and advocates to take direct action, direct public funds to systems that need it most, prioritize highest impact interventions, as well as develop coalitions, communities of practice, right? And groups of folks to come together to, use the data to have a shared set of facts and information to be able to make informed decisions. We want to provide this data to support coordination between technical assistance providers. Epic is an EFC, a TA provider, among some other folks on the call here. And having this data set, we really hope will enable folks to say, I'm working here, I'm working there, and we can kind of have a level playing field of information and know where folks are making contributions. We also want to be able to lift up success stories. How can we utilize this data to say, hey, here's how folks are operating well. Here are areas where people are doing more with less. How can we highlight the success stories, build trust, and be able to really show where there's been improvement and strong durability of drinking water. And lastly, we really want to show what's possible, right? How can we envision a world in which drinking water data is better understood by folks, where you're able to get information in sort of a one-stop shop. You can see how data sets compare, which ones are of sufficient quality for your use case, and where are there data gaps? Where do we have a poor understanding of a particular issue, and where can we put resources towards bettering our understanding, collecting more data, standardizing, increasing interoperability, right? These are all goals that are a part of the work. If you want a next slide here. So, like we said, this is just the beginning. We're going to be having beta testing sessions December 8th through 18th. If you scan the QR code there, and if Jesse, if you want to drop the link in the chat to be able to sign up for a usability session. We also have a get involved form if you want to do other types of engagement beyond usability sessions, just want to be kept in the loop, fill that form out so that we can keep in touch. And also, if you don't see any sessions available to you during that time period, jump into the Get Involved form, and there's some instructions on how you can request additional times. So sign up for a session, get access to the tool, give us feedback. we're really excited for folks to see what we've been up to. In terms of timeline, we're hoping for a version 1.0 release in sort of mid-February of this coming year. And then we have support for 2026 to understand how the tool is being used, what are the features that folks need, how can we iteratively develop both on the data side as well as the tool side, right? So the door is open for feedback, partnership, and sort of code development on this, and we'll be working on it for the extent of next year. So with that, we are going. No, that's perfect. We're going to transition to our panel here and hear from folks from different organizations, right, who are using data in their day to day. So a little transition here. So as we've developed the national tool, we've grappled with the role that data plays in identifying, prioritizing, and addressing drinking water issues, while also working to identify best practices and success stories. What's working and what isn't. Nearly all of us use some type of data in our work, but is it the right data? Are we using it correctly? And what data do we actually need to make better decisions? I'm going to introduce our four panelists, and we'll hear from them on these questions and the role data plays in work to have better access to safe, affordable, and reliable drinking water. So thank you, panelists, for joining me today. Some quick intros here. I'm joined by Grace Harrison at the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. She's the project manager of Water Equity Research. Her work addresses persistent inequities in access to safe, reliable, and affordable drinking water and wastewater across California in the United States. Grace holds a Master of Public Health in Environmental Health Sciences and a Bachelor's of Science in Society and Environment from UC Berkeley. If folks also want to clap in the chat as we go through these intros that were virtual and not in person here. I'm also joined by Jodi Hilsaback. She serves as the Environment Program Manager at Rural Community Assistance Partnership, or RCAP. For over 2 years, she has supported work under the Environmental Finance Center program, as well as other initiatives funded by the EPA. In this role, she helps advance technical assistance efforts for small rural communities in the areas of drinking water, wastewater, and economic development. Before joining RCAP's national team, Jodi worked as a grant manager and technical assistance provider supporting community infrastructure and capacity. Also from RCAP, joined by Laura Landez. She's the Associate Director of Research and Data. She's been with RCAP for 6 years, working on various research topics about rural communities in drinking water, wastewater, and economic development, as well as diving deep into RCAP's data and reporting on its technical assistance activities across the country. Before that, Laura worked as an EPA contractor on drinking water topics and then received a Master's of Environment and Management from Nichols School of the Environment at Duke University. Lastly, here we are joined by Anthony DeRosa. He's the Executive Director of the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, or ASDWA. With over 25 years at the association, he builds partnerships, strengthens co-regulatory implementation, and empowers state programs to deliver safe, reliable water to every community. Blending a passion for problem solving with consensus building, Anthony works to support state program needs, promote cooperative federalism, and advance ASDWA's mission of protecting public health by ensuring safe drinking water for all. Now that we've introduced our panelists, we'll go to Laura for question 1 here. First off, drinking water is complicated. Data can play a role in helping to make sense. How do you use data to make sense of situations, level the information playing field, and communicate effectively? Are there any good examples of how you've been using data in your work?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us all. Happy to be here. And yeah, thank you so much for this presentation and this tool and this question. RCAP, again, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, where Jodi and I work, we're a technical assistance provider working across the country in small rural and tribal communities. RCAP we use data every day to understand the work that our technical assistance providers are doing in the field. So for our reporting, and to do our own screening and research on communities that might need our help, and sort of understand situations. Critically, also, though, technical assistance providers in the field every day are doing things that involve using or collecting data that matters to the community, the water system, whoever they're working with, utility community members. So some examples of what they might be helping make possible as technical assistance providers would include, helping with a rate study, or an income survey. Those are just a couple examples, but these activities involve collection and analysis of data, and they're very important to the community's financial capacity. So, for example, they might have to do an income survey to prove eligibility for certain types of grants or loans. They might need to do a rate study to understand the financial flows and the needs of their water system and with, what might be a reasonable and realistic rate situation for customers. So it can also be helpful in that situation too. Like it can be helpful to have tools to learn about other systems rates. So learning about what similar systems have done can always be informative.
Sweet, thanks for that. I'll pass it to Jodi here.
Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate all the work you guys are doing. To build on what Laura had said, here at RCAP, we use a technical, managerial, and financial assessment, and we use that assessment to help us collect data to understand better where that system or community is and how we can help them get through their needs. Collecting data in those three different areas really shines a light on where we need to focus our work and how our technical assistance providers can help that community or system. And then it also allows us the opportunity to work with our funders to showcase the work we're doing. We do one of the technical, managerial, and financial assessments at the beginning of our work with the community or system, and then we also do it at the end. So we can collect data to show the improvements that we've helped them make throughout the process, and then it highlights the needs for the technical assistance going forward.
Appreciate that. Grace, over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I first want to give a little context to the perspective that I'm bringing in particular. So I work for a large academic research institution, and at the Luskin Center for Innovation. And the goal of the Luskin Center for Innovation is to inform effective and equitable environmental policies. So it's absolutely critical to ensure that the data that we're using to inform our research is high quality and widely available. But even more important in some ways that it's easily accessible for folks. So not only that it's accessible for the researchers, but also when we're communicating our findings to the groups that we're working with, it's great if folks are able to see and understand that data themselves rather than just sort of relying on us. So we want to develop methods that can be replicated or further developed by interested parties, because that's often how excellent research comes about. But I'll give one example of day-to-day data use for us. And the first thing that comes to mind is the LA wildfires in January of this last year, or this year, I guess we're still in 2025. During that, there were so many perspectives being shared, so much data and information being shared, often some misinformation about the causes of the fires, who should be held responsible, and really importantly, if the drinking water or surface water was safe for folks. So data was really critical for the LA community at that time and for people who were watching and learning from the crisis. So we needed data to be really localized when we're talking about drinking water data or air quality data. And for many of us, it might be easy to find information about, what water system you were served by, or has that water system tested for X, Y, and Z contaminant recently? Sort of, are you cleared to drink it? But for many people, it's really hard, and especially when there was so much information coming about. So clear, factual, data-driven communication from trusted sources like UCLA was really, really critical at that time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Really highlighting the need, for data in long-term efforts over time, right? As Jodi was talking about in terms of data on technical assistance interventions, right, and pre and post, right? But then also, Grace, you point out, right, during acute crises, that having this information accessible for an audience that might not really have had concerns about their drinking water before, right, are suddenly facing problems and looking for information. Anthony, I'll hand it over to you to round us out on this one.
Sure. Thanks, Gabe. And again, yeah, first, thanks for having me. And thanks again for Epic's effort on the project here and just generally supporting water quality data access, transparency, and harmonization of this data. For me, I work with ASDWA. We represent the regulators. So, drinking water quality data is very important. It's kind of an exciting week here for data. I'm actually at Amazon's headquarters this week with EPA in the States, and we're building the next generation of the Safe Drinking Water Information System. So very fun stuff, and getting to meet with all of you people here. So to the question, we work with a wide range of drinking water quality data, whether that's compliance monitoring data, contaminant occurrence trends, treatment performance metrics, things like that. I think it's essential for our mission. It helps us identify risks early. It helps us prioritize resources, and it could really help with communication. Getting clear communication out amongst the sector and then to the public. And then you mentioned earlier, I think very correctly, that drinking water is complex, right? The data levels the playing field by making information consistent, comparable, especially across states where there's usually a high variability, and it ultimately allows us to simplify things, to tell our water stories, and then to try to get a better picture of water quality, whether that be locally or nationally.
Sweet. Thanks, Anthony.
Yep.
So it's clear that folks are using data, right, in your day in and day out, a variety of different sources. Excuse me, but my hold on. My role here at Epic is a data scientist, right? I've worked with data for many years now, and the things that excite me about the work is when you see a data point or a fact that just makes you go, wow, right? Like, I didn't think that the world worked that way, but here we go. Here's a piece of data that says otherwise. And so, Anthony, I want to hand it over to you first, right? Is there a moment, right, that you can think of where you saw some chart, some fact, right, that really kind of changed your perception, right, and changed your idea of how things work or are not working?
Yeah, Gabe. Thanks for that question. A couple come to mind, and I've probably told some of these stories before, but I was, as you're asking, I'm thinking of a completely different response now, and I'm often surprised by what's not in the data, and I think that's a more common story for our sector, right? It's the questions I can't answer where I was certain that the data would tell me a story, and I think that it's funny. That's how I met Epic, right? You guys are working on a consolidation study using CIDWIS data, and I ended up getting in contact with Shri and just talking out just what were the goals of the project, what were we trying to extract from the data, and then where were the limitations, what was not going to come out of the data just because we weren't tracking it. And I think that really starts to um, just invite thought about what type of data do we need to be more reflective on how we're doing as a national program. Um, so I don't know, that really opened me up, and it makes me think a lot about how we use data for the look back, evaluating and measuring our programs' efficacy, whether regulations are effective or impactful. I don't think that we're good at that yet, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to use data better. So yeah, rather than going into a shocking data analysis example, I really think it's quite relevant to point out what's not in our data. That's
Yeah,
surprising.
that's a great point, Anthony. We're always, hypothesis generating, and can we say this? Can we ask this question? And taking that moment to say, wait a second, we can't, but we would like to. And we might be a couple years out, a few years out from being able to answer the question, what's the work that we have to do now, right, to be able to have that aha moment? Whoa, this is actually how things work. Grace, I
Yeah.
want to hand it over to you and see if there's any moments that have really just kind of made you go, wow.
Yeah, data is always surprising. It's never as boring as it might seem. Um, so one thing that stands out to me, one project in particular that's just continually surprising me is the project that I'm working on with my colleagues here from RCAP. And we're developing drinking water compliance needs assessments for multiple states in the US. And I think probably all of us here intellectually know that every single state has their own drinking water challenges that they're dealing with, their own unique set of contaminants and violations. But diving into the detailed compliance records from each state has been so interesting, just to see the different types of violations and common contaminants that each state is dealing with. They really are so unique, and it's hard to see a commonality often between states or regions. And often you have to look even more local than the state level to really understand the story that's being told. Um, each state has state-specific requirements that they're reporting, different data reporting norms, even the way that they're reporting their federally required data can sometimes be different. So it's interesting, when we're learning about their different funding sources, some of the different political dynamics in each state, different technical assistance providers, and the perspective that they bring. So yeah, working on this project has just reinforced to me even more that we cannot generalize drinking water challenges or solutions. And that, as you guys have mentioned in this webinar, we have to look locally, pretty much to the smallest scale that we can. So yeah, it's always interesting to learn about the unique challenges they're facing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Grace. And whenever I'm on a data rabbit hole, I always say the devil's in the details. And you start to, like lift up a rock and you're like, uh-oh, like this is gonna spiral out, right? And understanding, right, that data is a reflection of reality, but it's not reality, right? And how can you access data to get the best available perspective, knowing that, there are some nuances, and Anthony, as you point out, right, there's some data that's just not there, right? And we have to know those limitations. I want to pass it over to Jodi here from RCAP and hear if there's any wow moments.
Thank you, Gabe. In the role I play, I think the biggest thing that was shocking to me was starting to see some of the rising costs in construction in projects, and to see these small rural communities that we work with, and the project prices doubling or tripling for them, in a community, that they were worried about being able to afford in the first place, the project, and then having, supplies go up. Increasingly amounts was very shocking, and I think something that was concerning to me.
Laura, how about you?
Yeah, it's hard to follow all these great answers, but I think the first thing that popped into my head came from this image from a slide I saw a couple months ago at one of our own RCAP events, that is just a reminder of something that we saw in some of our recent research. And it's just the sheer number of rural communities that have not received any funding from various federal programs for water infrastructure funding. For the data we pulled was for over 20 years recently. And so that was something that we saw in our research analyzing USA spending data. And there was an order of magnitude difference, like
Mm,
well more than 10 times, in the number of communities that did not receive these funds compared to the number that did, which
mm.
it made quite a visual.
Yeah, that is alarming. Yeah, and really interesting using USA spending data to get access. That's another source that's out there in terms of federal dollars, right, going towards investment. If anyone wants a sidebar about USA spending, we can set up a time to chat. But it's a beast with a lot of data in it. So Anthony, you did a really good job queuing us up here for data gaps, right? And
Mhm.
understanding that there might be a lot of hypotheses that we have, but don't necessarily have the data to answer. And so I kind of want to hone in on this question and get some specifics from the group here on situations where, you've seen data maybe in one geography but not available in another, or it's really rich for some programs but not for others. Grace, I'll hand it over
Yeah.
to you first, right? And you work, specifically on California, but you also do national work, right? And knowing that California has a really robust data collection program, I'm curious if there's elements that you've seen in California that you'd like to see replicated in other places.
Yeah, I'll focus on physical consolidation because we were chatting about that earlier. So California has done probably more systematic state level work on consolidating small and failing drinking water systems than probably any other state. California also has a dedicated statewide funding program to develop and sustain solutions for these systems. And then the state explicitly prioritizes physical consolidation as one of those um, solutions for systems. So first, off the top, this level of permanent targeted state funding for consolidation is pretty rare. But then on top of that funding, California also publishes, the State Water Board publishes a consolidation data dashboard and engagement data so that the public can see which water systems are being actively engaged for consolidation, or those that have already been consolidated or funded. So this, open tracking of consolidation is really great because it's pretty much impossible to do this with the data that's available on SIDWIS Fed. Happy to be proven wrong, but you can't really tell whether a system has been consolidated or not, and there's no incentive for states to keep that data up to date currently. So California also reports their consolidation outcomes, which is excellent. So there's transparency not only in the planning, but the execution and solutions so that researchers like myself and my team and colleagues can follow up on those consolidations and document how they were successful or what challenges they're facing and remain for the state to work through. So yeah, this type of data is not currently available at the national scale, and so that type of research just hasn't been able to occur, but I think it would be very valuable in the future.
Yeah, Grace, that's a really great example, and I'd sort of found that before we had this conversation, and I was like, they've got data going back like 8 or 10 years, and then dug around and couldn't find it anywhere else. And as you say, it really enables that longitudinal analysis of was this the right intervention? What are the outcomes from doing so? So that we can look back and say this was a good decision, or here's how we could be making better ones. Laura and Jodi, I want to hand it over to you in the RCAP corner. So, RCAP working as a EFC serving rural systems, I'm really curious about how the data landscape is different in rural contexts. Do you see data gaps, shortcomings in quality when dealing with rural systems compared to more populated areas?
Sure. Yeah. I can start. Just, it's well known that national level data sets like those provided by the Census Bureau, while still extremely helpful, don't get me wrong, they're far from perfect at representing small rural and tribal communities. So, um, in our situation, RCAP serves lots of communities that are so small that they are not CDPs or census designated places. So we actually can't pull census data on them. And this can make our data gathering for reporting, for example, more complicated, let alone the background research or other efforts that technical assistance providers are doing every day. And then In addition, we also, I think, all know that there were some challenges with the most recent decennial census in 2020. And then you have to also consider, the issues with relying on ACS, the American Community Survey, which is also data from census. Even though this data is much more in depth than the decennial census, and it is basically like, constantly being collected all the time, every year. It is extrapolating information about larger populations from samples of populations. So, because obviously it would be impossible to ask every person in the country all of these detailed questions every year or so. So obviously, you have to do that. But yeah, this data is even more challenging in rural and small communities, and often information provided through that is based on a sample that didn't actually, come from anyone in that particular small community that, we might be working with or someone else might be working with. So yeah, I mean, beyond just, the reporting and the behind the scenes initial research on one individual community, it's also, I think, super important to understand just who's out there and who needs what, and what all those different situations are in different communities. It's all important, and there are understandably huge gaps.
Hmm. Hmm. Jodi, do you have anything to add from RCAP's perspective?
I would just like to add a little bit of drill down to actual communities and the human capacity and time for them to gather data. Most of the rural communities are being ran by only a handful of people, sometimes two or three, and they don't have the time or the capacity or sometimes the knowledge or experience to be able to collect data, whether it's financial, customer, data related to their utilities or even their assets. So when we collect data on a national scale, we're trying to show the impact that helping these communities fill this gap of data can also enhance the amount and the capacity in which we can provide technical assistance.
Appreciate that. Anthony, to round us out here, given your
Yeah.
role working with state agency staff across the country, you must see a lot of state-specific data that you're like, this could be used or, ported over the program generated in, another state. Do you think, or do you see a lot of data that's left on the table? And really the key question here is whether that's through data interoperability, right? The behind the scenes IT connections from one system to the next, or is it a standardization limitation, right? That states are collecting data that's apples to oranges. And if you put it all together, it would just be a fruit basket rather than let any like for like comparisons. So I'm curious what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that is my perspective. Yeah, you said it very wonderfully. No, I think that's the biggest challenge that we have. There's this wealth of state-specific data that never makes it to national systems. It's something that's always been exciting for me is, once we get past this modernization thing, and I see all the chat, please send me your Sidwis wish lists. Getting past that modernization is getting to a place where we have more options to gather, collect, and combine data, even at that state level. Once state systems become more web accessible and web enabled, we'll be able to talk to each other in ways that we couldn't do before. That could lead to unprecedented data insights for the water sector. I mean, states are collecting detailed treatment process data, operator compliance logs, localized contaminant occurrence data. I mean, it's everything that goes far beyond the federal reporting requirements. And I think that those data sets remain siloed because of exactly what you said. It's the interoperability issues, it's the standardization issues. And I think that's critical because, those are the data that tell us what treatment strategies work under what conditions, where are the emerging contaminants showing up before they hit the national radar. All of that intelligence, as you said, it ends up left on the table. And if we could integrate it, I think we would move from a reactive kind of compliance universe into a more proactive risk management. And that's, I think, what excites me so much about data in our sector is the idea that it stands to transform the very paradigm of what we do. Everything right now is compliance and reaction. Something happens, and we come in and we use that data to enforce on that. so it doesn't happen again. I want data to tell me something is about to happen. I want the data that tells me, hey, we're seeing that fingerprint of data right before an MCL exceedance. And if you start doing these 5, 6 steps, you can maybe bring it down. And when you start thinking about the potential for big data AI, the consolidation of not just state data, but even systems data. I've been in some very exciting conversations with some software manufacturers for utility organizations and their use of AI and their data collections, the ability not just to provide a single user with what's the right choice, but a bigger crowdsourced. This is what other systems with a similar kind of situation might do in that situation. Now I'm getting information proactively about what's happening in the water, and then what should I do about it? Or what are my options? So, using the data the way it should be used, using the tools the way it should be used, and putting the human at the center, making those decisions. I think, and I say this a lot, we're completely lacking on a holistic view of drinking water data management. And we have software silos. We lack tools that help us do our jobs. Our data and our software should be a superpower, and we're not there yet.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really like that framing around being proactive, right? Understanding where might issues, be occurring rather than that reactive. It gets a lot to the ethos around our tool development, right? Is to understand, okay, who should be receiving funds, who should be right supported, rather than here's who is kind of in line, and that's how we can
Or,
mistakenly persist issues.
or what are we missing, Gabe? I think there's always, it's never going to be perfect, but I think, we need to continually push to show what's possible.
Hmm. Hmm. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, panelists. We're going to open it up for other folks to jump in here. Can I just get a real quick clap, round of applause in the chat for Laura, Jodi, Grace, and Anthony for joining us today? There we go. I'll do the actual audible clapping. So thanks y'all so much. Feel free to hang on here. Jesse, would you mind posting the questions that I went through in the chat? And if there are any in the Q&A. So we're going to transition to an open discussion here. So if folks would like to take a crack at one of the panel questions, have some thoughts about improving the drinking water data landscape, or questions about the tool, anything is fair game. So open discussion here.
Gabe, are you able to see we have two questions in the Q&A? There's the first one, which is this a tool only for drinking water, or will there also be information on sanitation services?
Yes, that is a great question. And actually, another shout out to the folks at EPA. As I mentioned, that a lot of our work has been enabled by EPA's development of a nationally consistent service area boundary data set for drinking water. And I think 3 weeks ago, they dropped a sewer shed or wastewater boundaries. So the roughly 17,000, I believe, wastewater utilities, there are now boundaries for those. That sets us up. Short answer is we're focused in on drinking water right now, but that does not preclude us from including. And also want to mention that EPA's infrastructure capacity and assessment tool, ICAT, includes both drinking water and wastewater in it currently. And then, Anne, I see you have a question. Would love to hear more about the data science team, about the gut check QA process and what that looks like. We're working on a tool in collaboration with MSU. Not sure what the MSU stands for there at the county level, that demonstrates households that lack access to water and sanitation. We run into issues where we look at the data and know from our expertise that it's inaccurate or underreported, but it's the official USG statistics. This is a really, really great question here, right? In terms of it's there's known unknowns, known knowns, and unknown unknowns, right, about the data. Like, where can we say, I think that maybe there's been some, there's maybe lacking data availability, or there's universe constraints here, but it's different than a, well, let's see if there's any outliers, right? Or are there any NAs, right? Automated checks that we can run through. And we've been trying to capture this in our data quality framework. We've had ideas about sending out a survey to folks, right, who can give their sort of professional hot take, if you will, right? Like, I trust this data, and here's why, or I don't trust this data, and I don't necessarily have any evidence to show for it, but I don't necessarily think that it's the best data out there, because we do hear a lot of it. I know in one particular instance, in our development, we were trying to understand the population served number within the Safe Drinking Water information system within CIDWIS, right? And our colleagues at EPA pulled when was that data last updated? And I think, if I'm remembering the stat right, it was like 40% haven't updated since 2013. I would double check that number, but it was basically a large majority of them hadn't updated their population served numbers, right? And so that was a way we knew going into that conversation, right, that we don't think these population served numbers are right. It's why we use interpolation from census geographies, building weights. EPA also does the same with their ICAT tool, right? So understanding that there could be better numbers out there, but actually getting, that was another wow moment. Like, whoa, that is a surprising statistic, right? So working to capture that sort of professional subject matter expert, right, or gut check is another way of describing it. Emily, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this, sort of being in the data as well.
No, I think that like accurately describes the kind of like various rabbit holes we go down trying to evaluate data quality and how well do these numbers reflect reality, which is sometimes really hard when you don't have anything to compare to. A lot of it, yeah, as you mentioned, is like asking experts and people that manage the data set, like, what do you think about this data set? Like, how can we use it? How should it not be used? And all those really difficult things that are really hard to quantify, but I feel like should be considered in decisions about how people should or should not be using data for a project. So yeah, that's you answered it perfectly, Gabe. But yeah, in our methodology document, we'll have things that we found written out and things that we've heard from people. But it would be really cool in the future to have almost like a Rotten Tomatoes score or something kind of like that as like an idea from other people as well that work very often with these data sets. Like, what do you think about them? What should people know about them? To help capture some of that really rich information that you won't get if you're just like seeing the data set for the first time. But yeah, excellent.
Yeah, that's a really great idea, and I think, Emily, it hones on, a lot of people, well, not a lot of people. Someone is an expert on it and is like, this is why this data is not of great quality, and that information can sometimes often sit right within their program, within their agency, just in with that other data colleague. That's how it gets shared out, but everyone else has to rediscover that fact, or in a worst case, not discover that fact, right? And you get this sort of mistakes get duplicated, and there isn't a collective knowledge sharing. So I love that Rotten Tomatoes score on the data quality. Alan Robertson has a question here. Any thoughts on how to improve data quality and or consistency of data for boil water orders? That is a great question. Actually, Emily wrote a fantastic blog about it. If we can dig up that link and put it in the chat. I remember the highlights being PWSIDs being offered in it. We also, as pullers and harmonizers of data, really love data downloads and programmatic access through API, so we can get that data out easily, right? Emily, were there any other suggestions that we had to improve the data quality and availability on those?
Yeah, really just ability to, as you mentioned, APIs and data download options. logging advisories over time as well, because there were situations where someone might just report the active advisories, but not like the log of past ones that have closed. But oh, here it is. It finally loaded for me, but I'll drop it in the chat for people that want to check it out. But we also recognize, right, that water systems and states are already tasked with reporting a lot of information. So this is just a way to help make that information more accessible for others within the drinking water sector. Um, but yeah, consistent data reporting as well was another thing. Maybe like the state format, or not the state, the like date format swapped from one type to another type and one year to another. And simple tables as well was really helpful in order to, if there wasn't an API or a data download option, having a very simple table is easy for not only me to navigate, but also able to collect as well with permission from the state, of course. But yeah.
Hey, Gabe, I jump on that one too
Yeah,
because
please.
we've done some work with the agency in collecting some of this information just on an annual basis, and I think to Alan's point, this is valuable stuff that's out there. But what Emily brought up, I think is right on. It At some point, states are going to have to make prioritizations about what they're tracking, and I find that that's where some of the data quality issues come in. Something that's very important, critical data that's tied to a business need is always going to be of higher quality than those data that are not further reported, they're not dashboarded, they're collected on the side. I would say that the data system and having a better data system that's easier to track, enter in that data, collect that data, close that data out. That when you start to get efficiencies with your data system, it allows you to do more. And so, my hope is that I think that's a way to help set that consistency piece that's missing right now. And yeah, I mean, Alan put it right in the chat there. It may take regulation. You may need that federal baseline to kind of force that. Um, this is how we're going to do it. This is how frequently we're going to report it, and this is what it's going to look like.
Mhm.
And to his point, not likely in the political environment, but it's something. Like I said, I've seen the ASDA team go through this process, and it just immediately I'm thinking, why can't we just press a button and pull all this data out of their system? You know, put it up on a dashboard somewhere, and uh, give us 5 years, 10 years, we'll be
Yeah.
there.
But I think, absent, regulatory institutions stepping in and saying, hey, you need this data collected in this way, right? We've seen a lot of success in terms of, really, hey, here are the 13 states that have publicly available boil water notice and advisory data, right? And the hope is that, there will be particularly folks who are on the margins saying, I've got that data, but it's not public. I just need to flip a switch, right? And at the very least now I've made progress and having that available. We saw a specific case of that with it was in Indiana, flipping their data to public, and then it's sort of you can build organic momentum, right? And folks saying, well, I don't want to be the odd one out. If everyone else is releasing their data, like I should too, right? So thinking, I think you're exactly right, Anthony, that absent right regulation, we often see a lot of entropy when it comes to data collection, a lot of variation in standards and formats, right? But given our our current political environment, right, what are creative ways in which we can all kind of row in the same direction, make sure we're not rowing in a circle either, but be able to, kind of lean on the standards and practices that we, as a ecosystem, identify as being valuable. Any other folks either on the panel or in the discussion group have any thoughts about boil water notice in advisory data? Okay, we can move on here. There's another comment or question in the chat. What can we do to improve the interoperability of state level water data? Are there efforts of promoting a common data model similar to efforts in the health informatics space? That's a great parallel thinking about requirements for medical record sharing, right, from one system to the other. There's some stuff there. Anthony, I'm eager to hand it over to you, given your role at ASDWIP, but also if Anyone
Yeah.
else has any thoughts on interoperability from state level systems?
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously a big focus of mine. Like it's a dream, to have that, like I just said earlier, that the ability to just draw down the state level data. It is apples and oranges, and it makes sense that it is. A lot of the data systems were developed over time, independently, and they were localized systems. That's just how systems were built. And they were built to custom support the business needs of individual programs. So the need to kind of move data from one state to another wasn't a problem in the past. We did a lot of kind of unofficial stuff, through ASDO, and it's still stuff that I try to support, where we're using Teams environments and resource libraries just to share information. We just recently started pulling in kind of treatment data around efficacy of treatment specific to PFAS. So if your state is treating for PFAS, if you've approved treatment types, as much information as we can get, where are these systems? How many systems do you have? Groundwater, surface water. What is the mitigation type? Are you using GAC or using something else? If you're using GAC, what type of GAC did you use? And then what was your experience with that? And then, can we share that to try to change the knowledge piece? And I think that's a really kind of spit and twine version of the future state, which is really when we're more, in kind of a web services environment where state data just needs to be readable and shareable. And so I think right now we're in a very unofficial space where we try to do a lot of that work through ASDOA communities. But the data system doesn't support it yet. And we're just not there where the software is allowing us to just, press buttons and generate dashboards and share data with each other. I mean, it'd be very easy to have those conversations and say, hey, if we could just get it all in this format, we could share that data. So I think it's a possible future. We're all working towards that goal. I think that the general CITES modernization process and the length of time that we've spent on that process has slowed us down as a sector in terms of how we're getting to those places. Those are like 2025 realities, and we're still back, in 2015, probably building software.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else, either panelists or in the wider group, have any thoughts about interoperability, whether from an IT or a metadata or a collection methods perspective, right? From not states up, but states across each other. Any other thoughts? Feel free to come off mute for folks who are not on the panel too. Okie dokie. Moving on to the next one. Daniel asked, curious about SCADA data, live sharing between large public water systems. Perhaps too much cyber risk? Maybe that is outside the scope of this conversation.
I'm here. I could take that one.
If I can hand it back to you.
Yeah. And hey, Daniel, good to see you. Daniel's a neighbor working with the Chlorine Institute just downstairs from ASTOA. So this is something that I've actually been in communication with some software developers on the utility side. And a lot of what they're looking to do is starting with how you feed information back to the user. So, that the data systems will learn over time and feed you back information. The way that these things work, though, I've put out there, and it's possible, it's technically possible that, these same vendors that are pulling all of this data and feeding it back, within these little bubbles could very easily commingle that data. And I think I mentioned a little bit earlier about, the idea of maybe an AI tool providing a candidate issue to you and saying, all right, Anthony, we're seeing this problem. And your SOPs say you need to do X, Y, and Z as your options, but then maybe even providing like a second set of validation or recommendations. Other similar utilities, either regionally, nationally, whatever, however that match gets made, might treat a situation like this by doing A, B, or C. So now you've got kind of, this is what I need to do. Here are some other options. It's just bringing me more information. So, I think that we're starting to see, especially with kind of big data and AI, the potential for not just reinforcing how I do my business in my utility, but if I allow some of that data to be shared regionally or with partners, I think that there's a lot of strength there in terms of um, how am I learning from what you're learning and your experiences, and really using data in a very, very different way to
Mm-hmm.
change how we approach everything that we're doing currently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
It's a great question.
that's a great point there in terms of often the data generators, right, are thinking about that primary use case, right? Like, I've got to collect this contaminant data to stay within compliance, right? And that's the
Mhm.
goal. That secondary and tertiary and beyond use cases that might require just a little bit of a tweak, a little bit of addition of metadata, or available through an existing, state platform, for example, right, could be used in a variety of different contexts that you would not necessarily think of being that primary data role, right, in the generation, and just trying to, I've got my North Star and here's what I'm generating the data for, right? That's totally understandable. We're all super busy and all, trying to juggle many things at once, but taking that moment to think who else could maybe use this if I just put
Mhm.
a little bit of effort, would it enable, research or, a better understanding from one system to the other? So that's a great point there.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
So
Or yeah.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, the cybersecurity thing is always, ever present. But I do see ways for this data to be shared, certain types of data to be shared in the future to help with these types of things. So I thought it was a great question.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is the extent of questions that we have in the chat. Again, sort of open room here. If folks have any questions about the tool itself, any questions explicitly for the panelists here, or Laura, Grace, Jodi, if you all want to chime in any sort of concluding thoughts, or what you're excited about moving forward. I can also call on people, but
I can say I am excited about the ever improving user experience, user interface design that I think Epic's newest tool is a part of that. But yeah, Anthony, I hope your vision of bringing the data together, putting it all in one dashboard and making it so easy to download with the same IDs occurs one day. But I think we're getting closer. And yeah, tools like this are an important step. So I'm really looking forward to exploring it more. And yeah, based off the past tools, I think it should be really easy, which is great.
Go for it, Laura.
Thanks. 100% agree, Grace. And yeah, also very excited to get into it in the future. And I'm excited because I think that it can fill gaps that have existed for a long time now. Because there are so many specific pieces that have not been together before. I was excited to see on one of those slides, Gabe, about that y'all were actually like going through the effort of FOIA-ing, some of the data, like some of that SRF award data is like so important from our perspective. I think Jodi could agree. And trying to understand, how that's working, where it's going. So just yeah, having more things pulled together. The usability is amazing. And yeah, as long as we are just, staying aware of the limitations we have, then, I think we can't go wrong.
I would just add that, very excited for the opportunity to be a part of working with Epic as partners in the future and taking what data we collect and building, what you guys are collecting. And hopefully, as we all collaborate in the future, our data will continue to grow and become more useful across all the boards. And I just have to emphasize the fact, I think everybody has stressed it, that the lack of state data being consistent, and that is so frustrating across so many different facets of the work that we do. So, again, echoing and applauding those who are moving forward to make efforts to make that a better process for everybody.
Awesome. And I'll close with I think just the quick one before the excitement is, the recognizing the concern and that there's always a little bit of danger with displaying data like this. Um, I just want to get into everyone's head who might be watching at home going, well, what about this? Still, I don't think that those concerns should stop this kind of exploration and innovation in our approaches because it initiates the conversation. And I think it's very important that we're talking about how we're using these data, what data we need, and how we're displaying it to tell our stories. I like this tool because it promises to break down those silos and create that kind of unified view of drinking water quality and shows us what's possible if we can do that. I think that that's important largely for transparency and public trust. My biggest concern is ensuring data quality and consistency, making sure that the inputs are standardized so that the outputs are as impactful as they can be. I think that'll take a little bit of time. I think that there's work to do in building a culture of data sharing kind of across states. And technology moves fast and trust and collaboration take time, right? And so I would be remiss if I didn't always call out Olga from RCAPS. Everything moves at the speed of trust, but these things move at the speed of trust in government. And both of those things are incredibly slow. So it's going to take a little bit of time. And then I just close by saying, we're storytelling with data is the future. And these tools are really the beginning of that era. And it's great to see this progress. So, what we have to say and how we tell our stories, that's going to become critical. And so we need good data and we need good tools and good visualization of data in order to do that. So thank you guys.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Anthony, and really appreciate the honesty in terms of we're not going to get things perfect every single time the first time. So with that, would really appreciate folks if you haven't already signed up for our usability sessions. If you want to be tracking this over the long term, get announcements as we release content, the initial version 1.0 in February. Please fill out that get involved form. As Emily talked about, right, data quality, transparency, iterative development are core to this work. And so we'll have multiple, opportunities and pathways for folks to submit feedback, whether through formal or informal, attending our sessions. And my email's there front and center. So, if you want to reach out, have a conversation, share feedback, share your experience in working with drinking water data, we're all for it. So with that, I really appreciate it. Can I get one more light clap in the Zoom for our panelists? Thank you all so much. The project development team, as well as Center for Neighborhood Technology, who's been doing the front end development. It's really taken a village. Also our water team, our water policy team and EFC side of the house for giving so much feedback as we create this tool. So thank you so much. With that, I think I can give back a minute here. So
Take it.
go forth and prosper, and we'll